What's up, everyone? So I will be answering a couple of questions today doing this as I post this here. Questions asked below. We're going to be talking a little bit about training. So this is also going to be eventually put up on Instagram, on YouTube. And so, again, that's the Always an Athlete YouTube page. You guys want to watch some of these. Those are on there as well. But point of today, we're going to be talking a little bit about training modifications, and what is the purpose of, well, even an exercise in the first place. And so when we're talking about training, we want to think about, as always, a purpose behind it. Specifically, we typically load the body through any means of an exercise. So more importantly today, obviously we talk about training, but the exercises we use in training. So I got a question the other day, and it was asking about, I was talking about the Hatfield squats. And they're asking about, why do I use Hatfield squats in the first place? And I kind of thought to myself, they said, because eventually they were like, well, why don't you use a back squat or a front squat or whatever? And I kind of thought to myself, well, why even use any sort of squat or any sort of movement? And it's to load a specific pattern, that the vertical force production, in a safe, effective manner that allows you to have high neurological output. Right, that's the point of essentially most resistance training. Now, there are other aspects of resistance training where you do want to incorporate the skill aspect. And for those of you that are familiar with like Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk and his categorization, there are certain movements that are for development and certain movements that are more for skill. And so when I'm talking about like a Hatfield squat, that's going to be specifically for the tissue development. I'm targeting the knee extensors, specifically with that movement, to try and get enough overload and stimulation to create adaptation. Now, we can either do that through maximal strength, we can do that through power movements, speed, strength, and so on, whatever continuum we're looking at. But at the end of the day, it is about stressing and developing the tissues to create adaptation. It's not about the skill. A skill-like movement might be something like a really lightly loaded weighted vest. Well, now that is technically resistance because you've added some additional mass. That's more for the skill of the movement potentially. Or maybe if you're a baseball player throwing a lighter or heavier ball, if you're a pitcher, in that case, you might be using those plyo balls you see. That's for the skill aspect. Obviously, you can't isolate only skill or only tissue, because when you perform your skill, you're going to have your tissues involved. Obviously, you can't throw a baseball without working your muscles, but I think you get the idea. And so, yes, I love that, hitting the Always an Athlete session as we speak. I appreciate that shout out right there, Tate. I think it's Tate, if I can see that right there. Tate Christie 1. I love that plug. Appreciate it. Thank you. But yes, we want to think about, are we training it for the tissue development, or are we training it for the skill? And in that tissue category, we typically have heavy resistance exercises, things for developing maximal strength, maximal motor unit recruitment, maximal output. Those movements we want to be safe, effective, and allow for maximal loading. So I'll get to the question as to why I use a Hatfield squat eventually, I promise. And then the other area we might be doing movements like plyometrics and jumps. Now, that's necessarily a skill. There is some skill component involved, but that's also for tissues, and that's getting the tissues to be loaded in the right way of speed and velocity, and getting that muscle tendon unit to interact together appropriately. So the question then goes back to, why am I using Hatfield squats for resistance training? Well, under that initial outline, resistance training and that specific movement is not designed to be good at squatting. It's designed to be good at, well, producing enough tension and load in a movement that allows for me to do it safely, effectively, and repeatedly. And so you might see my athletes squatting with a safety bar and doing those Hatfield squats. And the reason why is twofold. One, the athletes you might see, like if you're a 6'8" basketball player, 6'9", it's tough sometimes to squat. You got like size 17 feet, you're a big person, you're not necessarily spending your whole life squatting. And I'm not teaching the squat because the squat is going to be somehow the back squat is some magical movement that's going to make you super athletic. No, it's the pattern of load that actually matters, right? And so then we're doing a Hatfield squat because it's so much more freedom to stabilize yourself with your hands supported, being that this person might not be the most skilled squatter in the world. It allows us to have high levels of overload without the skill being a concerning factor. And if the skill is a low factor, or they're not very good at the skill of, say, squatting, because if you talk to any power lifter, they'll tell you there is technique involved. I watch a lot of elite FTS stuff, that Train Your Ass Off by Dave Tate, because I enjoy it quite a bit, but you can see it's skill-based. A lot of skill involved. And so if I'm trying to make sure then that person's not going to be limited by skill, I don't want to pick a movement that is so skilled. And so that's why I love the Hatfield squat. We set pins up on it. We are able to actually move through a range of motion to allow us to then load the pattern, but have our hands out for stability and so on. And it's a tough realization when you're brought up thinking that somehow a squat, like a back squat, is a magical pattern that is going to yield some crazy results. But when you look at it pragmatically, why we squat in the first place, then there are movements that are like these hybrid machine-like movements like the Hatfield squat, which makes a lot of sense. So it's an interesting talking point. So I'll answer some questions here after I went through that. Hopefully that made sense. What's up, Seth? Would you still involve plyometric exercise in sports such as hockey? I actually have never I'm horrible at ice skating. I'm not good at hockey, obviously not. I've never trained a hockey player. I've talked to some hockey coaches, and they've had some interesting opinions on it. Now, they talk about training the legs to be reactive, but not necessarily the ankle itself as much. And the reason why they said the ground contact times are so long. Now, again, I'm not a hockey player, so I apologize if this sounds stupid, but this is kind of regurgitating some of their comments. But what they had said basically was like, look, you want strong, powerful legs to be reactive, but you want a stiff ankle to an extent so your muscles can transmit forces, but the ankle and the Achilles are not getting the same stretch load. So while it might be beneficial to do plyometrics in general, I guess the benefits of them might be more towards like doing things that are more reactive for the quads, I guess. Again, I'm not a hockey player, but that's the best answer I can try and give if I even should be given an answer on that. Are Olympic lifts only option for explosive strength? No. What's the point of an Olympic lift, right? If the Olympic lift to move a bar fast. So people love Olympic lifting because it's a quantifiable, and well, it's subjective, but it's quantifiable because there's a catch to it. There's an endpoint. Power movement. If you look at someone do a trap bar jump, it's hard for the naked eye to be like, look, that person's jumping high. Now, you don't really know. Is it 4 inches higher, 3 inches higher, 1 inch higher? It's hard to tell when you're like 30 feet away. But you can tell if someone catches a clean. You can tell if someone performs a snatch. And because there's a clean and a snatch have a certain needed vertical displacement, by nature, they are limited by how much force and velocity you can produce. Well, I guess force changing velocity. So then what that means is that the fact that, let's say, a snatch has a higher displacement, you need more takeoff velocity to get that bar up that high. And in doing so, you could say, well, if they're able to catch in a taller position or they're able to lift more weight in the same position, they're becoming more powerful. But that by no means justifies Olympic lifting as the only mean to develop explosive strength. It's just easier to objectify, which is why a lot of coaches like it. Because you could say if someone's clean got better, we can assume that they catch the clean in the same position every time for the most part. Then we know they're displacing more weight at the same velocity. So more weight at same velocity, mass times velocity, means more power. So it's very objective and easy to measure that way, but doesn't mean it's the only reason why. You can do jumps and things like that to really help build explosive strength. I don't really use, I wouldn't use Olympic lifts, to be honest with you, that often. Why? Because the athletes I work with, they play basketball or they throw baseballs, and if they mess up their wrist in an Olympic lift, even a small probability as it is, if I can eliminate some small probability of something bad happening, then I don't need to maybe engage in that. It could be beneficial to not do it. What's up, AJ? Basketball Moses. The long hair, you coming out, you're gonna see I gotta throw the ponytail in one of these days for these videos, or maybe a high bun and get a robe on. I'm getting ready to train some hockey athletes. I'm just at loss, so looking for advice. Yeah, of course, man. It's tough. Again, Mike Boyle's trained a lot of hockey players. He's a good insight to look into. He has a lot of good stuff on there. Another one is Matt Shaw, I know, at Denver University. He's awesome as well. Again, I don't know hockey very well. I know you should train, well, I've been told, the adductors a lot, because that's how people get hurt quite a bit. A lot of hip extension. But again, I've never done it, so it'd be foolish for me to give too much of an answer. Best 3 exercises to increase speed. Off BR mark. I don't know what that means. Off BR mark for 30 meters. Best way to increase speed. I'm just going to take it as that. Well, what is speed and what are you moving? That's a really good question because a lot of times, depending on the sport, you got to think about what speed's actually occurring from, because if you're moving like Olympic lifter and your goal is to lift a heavy weight fast, the velocity output is actually dictated on your ability to produce force. The more velocity and force have a linear relationship. The more force you produce, the impulse, the more velocity you're going to produce. Now, that same being said, if you're sprinting, you need to produce lots of force, but you got to produce it really fast under a quick time constraint, and very different impact demands than that of an Olympic lift. So obviously how you go about training the two become very different, and understanding the limiting factors, ankle, knees, and hips, core, whatever, you got to then identify, what is the best means of doing it. I don't know, getting someone fast, as speed is such a vague concept though. Let me see, one here is how to start plyometrics. Plyometrics, Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky wrote a lot about this, but an easy way you can think about plyometrics are 3 things. 1, additional mass. Are you wearing something or not wearing something? 2, the speed at which you fall. The speed at which you fall dictates the amount of force you need to produce to stop yourself from falling. 3 is the time variable over which you have to then produce force or stop force. So those are 3 variables you can mix in to progress. And the most intense version of plyometrics would be high falling velocity, and you have to do it really quick and decelerate yourself and jump as high as you can. That is the pinnacle of maximal stimulus of plyometrics. And knowing that, you can then work backwards to then break down what is the lowest stimulus. Well, that'd be a long contact time with a small velocity coming downward and not jumping as high. And then progression just follows suit off of that. I want to begin first doing something that's light, easy, low effort, so I get the tissues used to that kind of demand. And then on top of that, I start to add some more velocity to it, the falling velocity, maybe takeoff velocity, maybe the shrinking the contact time over which it's expressed, and modifying those variables over time while slowly increasing the intensity through that means can be beneficial, but obviously then doing that with some patience, so you're not just like trying to get there by 1 month. It might take 3 months or 4 months. Let's go through a couple more. So we have I just kind of described a plyometric session. Do you prefer weighted jumps or plyometrics to increase power? Again, what kind of power are we talking about? Are we talking about power that's from reactive contact, so you hit the ground and try and bounce back up really high? Are you talking about just general power like an Olympic lifting movement? It's hard to define. If you're talking about an Olympic lifting movement for power, weighted jumps might make more sense. If you're talking about something where you're trying to be quick and elastic, maybe like a triple jump, well, that's where plyometrics make a lot of sense, because the ankle demands are very different, the time demands of force are very different, and so on. Well, I'm gonna end it here, y'all. This is gonna be up on YouTube on Always an Athlete. If you guys like these videos, feel free to subscribe and share. I'm gonna have it up on there. So I appreciate y'all listening as always. I hope you enjoy. Thank y'all for tuning in. You can shoot all the questions you want right now. I'm not answering them. I appreciate y'all. I'm hanging up here. As always, take care, and thank you.